The function of the Spirit is to be God-conscious. And its supreme privilege is union and communion with God. Man's spirit has the privilege of direct union with God. There's an amazing statement in 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 17. One of the most amazing statements in the Bible. You know, if you read your Bible without being surprised, I don't think you understand it. It is the most surprising book. We need to take verse 17 together with verse 16. Paul is talking about a warning against immorality. And he says, "Do you not know that he who is joined to a harlot or a prostitute is one body with her? For the two," he says, "shall become one flesh." Now, in that context, Paul goes on to make the most amazing statement. He says, "But he who is joined to the Lord is one spirit with him." Now, I trust I'll offend nobody, but there's a direct correspondence between sexual union in the flesh and spiritual union with God. That's how real it is. Just as really as a man can be united with a prostitute sexually, so man's spirit can be united with God spiritually. I want you to see it that clear and practical. Now here's a very important example of where you must not confuse the spirit with the soul. Paul says, "He that is joined to the Lord is one spirit." It would be completely incorrect to say he is one soul, because it's not the soul that's united, it's the spirit. You understand that? He that is joined to the Lord is one spirit. That's the great privilege of the human spirit through Jesus, through the atoning sacrifice, to have direct personal union with God. And I would say, I'll come back to this in a little while, but let me ask you this question. In one word, what is the activity by which we are united with God? Worship, that's right. That's why I believe worship is the highest activity of a human being. And if you don't see worship that way, I don't know whether you understand much about worship. And you see how creative worship is. Because again, taking the parallel, union is procreative in the physical, in the spiritual. I don't believe the church is ever really productive until it worships. It's by worship that we unite with God's Spirit. It's out of worship that creativity proceeds. All right, now, the Spirit, being in direct contact with God, reproduces God's attitudes and responses. It should not be dictated to from below. It should be directed from above. And I'll give you just two examples of Jesus and Paul. And these are statements made in the New Testament. I won't give you the references because we've got enough references without that. But it says in the Gospels three things about Jesus. He sighed in spirit, he rejoiced in spirit, and he groaned in spirit outside the tomb of Lazarus. Now, when it says in spirit, it's very carefully distinguishing it from soul. Jesus reproduced God's attitude and God's response to each of those three situations. His sigh was the sigh of God over a man who was deaf and dumb. His rejoicing was over the people that had responded to the gospel, the simple, the childlike. And his groaning was over the awful sadness of Lazarus' death. Then it says of Paul in various passages, Paul purposed in the Spirit. That means God's purpose for Paul became so much part of his spirit that it became his purpose. You see what I'm saying? And we need to ask ourselves, when I purpose things, do I purpose them in my spirit or in my flesh? Because Paul said, the things that I purpose, I don't purpose in the flesh. That with me there should be yes and no, and I'm not changeable, you understand? When I get God's purpose, that settles it, because I purpose in the Spirit. It says of Paul, he went bound in the Spirit to Jerusalem to be imprisoned there. But he was bound in spirit before he was ever imprisoned. In other words, God's destiny for him to be imprisoned was already so fixed in his spirit that he was bound before he was physically bound. You see what I'm saying? And then it says in Romans 1 verse 9, Paul says that he serves God in his spirit. I was teaching a Bible school. I mentioned this last night. I don't want to go into it, but the book out of which I was supposed to be teaching didn't make any distinction between spirit and soul, so I spent my whole time arguing with the book. And I think the poor class was thrown into confusion. But anyhow, setting that aside, one of the questions I asked the class was, would it have made any difference if Paul had said, I serve him in my soul? Is it the same? Now my answer is absolutely not. But I mean, you must make your own answer. You see, I think a lot of people serve people in the soul, serve God in the soul. We'll come to the functions of the soul in a few moments. But I hope you can see that these distinctions are not just theoretical, they're totally practical. If you can grasp them and apply them, they're going to change a lot of things in the lives of some of you.